first of the not-so-great courses. This first course is going to be on South Africa. Its intention is to supplement and complement the Vink Vink motorcycle tour of South Africa 2014. It's intended to be a contextual guide to the trip. Not a day-to-day guide, I emphasise. It won't even cover all the places that we'll visit, but a guide to put the whole trip in an historical context. Many of the places that we will ride through are significant in terms of the history of South Africa. They're significant in terms of the colonisers, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, in terms of the lives and the fate of a lot of the indigenous South African people that the colonisers encountered. Our trip starts in the centre of the Transvaal. Now, I'll probably use some historical names in this trip since it is a contextual and historical guide. The Transvaal is not in common use now, but it was then. And it was one of the Boer republics. And we start right from the heart of that. And we'll traverse north through the open expanses of the Transvaal, where the Boers settled and farmed, and where they fought many battles against the indigenous South Africans, particularly the Ndebele, who went on to form a great kingdom, and against the British, of course, during the Boer War. But in order to understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. The beginning, of course, starts in Cape Town, which we won't get to until towards the end of the trip. So we'll leave the colonisation issues until then. Long after colonisation, that the Boer farmers started to get itchy feet and wanted to move away from the fairly indeterminate boundaries of Cape Colony. This was partly to get away from the control of the Dutch East India Company. They set out northwards and eastwards and went across the areas that we will traverse later in the trip called the Small and the Great Karoo. And those that went east ended up coming up against a rather defensive tribe called the Xhosa. This lasted about a generation. These were the Trek Boers. The next generation got even itchier feet, and by now the British had taken over and were doing unacceptable things like abolishing slavery and demanding some better rights for the indigenous Africans. So a new generation of Boer farmers decided to head even further north. These were the Voortrekkers. They went up mostly on the western side of the Drakensberg and across the Orange River and across what would become the Orange Free State, and even some of them crossed the Vaal River into what would be called the Transvaal. During this course there were many different groups led by different leaders. It wasn't an easy trip. It was a slow trip with many wagons pulled by oxen, families, cattle. Now let's take a look at a chart which will show you the extent of the treks the Voortrekkers trekked. This map shows the routes of different groups of Voortrekkers. You'll notice where they diverge, there's a group that goes off to the right. They're the ones that are most important to us. They find their way down Drakensberg passes, which we will actually ride up, and settle in the land of the Zulus, where most of the action between Voortrekkers and Zulus and British and Zulus took place. How many fights they encountered with the locals is a little bit uncertain. A lot of their Voortrekking took place in the aftermath of a significant event called the Umfakande, which moved a lot of people off their traditional grounds. But they did have significant battles further north, certainly, as I mentioned, against the Ndebele, against the Pedi, and later on against the British. But that was after the Voortrekking had virtually come to an end in any event. This is a good time to say a little bit more about the Voortrekkers on the High Veld, that is the plateau at the top of the Drakensberg that drops away to the west and the south. Now in the High Veld, the Voortrekkers came across a very formidable foe in the name of a man called Umzilikazi. Now, Umzilikazi at one stage was a senior and trusted lieutenant of Shaka of the Zulus until they had a massive falling out. Whereupon Umzilikazi took his small clan up the Drakensberg onto the high veld of the Transvaal, where he fought a ruthless and murderous campaign against the local tribes up there, which were called the Ndebele. He took on their name when he defeated them. When the British couldn't pronounce it, it got changed to Matabele. Now, Umzilikazi was quite a formidable foe and didn't always fight fair, as you can see from this picture. Now, you can see in this picture, Umzilikazi is ordering one of his men to bowl underarm. This was a match against a team fielded by Shaka the Zulu, so it happened a little bit earlier than his encounter with the Boers. He and the Boers fought quite a few battles over 2 years before Umzilikazi took his clan, crossed the Limpopo River into today's Zimbabwe, and established his very large empire there. Later Boers in the Transvaal encountered another group called the Pedi. They had pretty much occupied all of what is today's Limpopo province and fought the Boers over land for many years. They had at least one major victory over the Boers in a great battle. The Boers' inability to subjugate the Pedi, in fact, was one of the reasons why the British moved against the Boer Republic and annexed it in 1877. Eventually the British defeated the Pedi under the leadership of Sir Garnet Wolseley. I mention him by name because we will encounter him later, but just as a little bit of a teaser, a little bit of trivia, it was Sir Garnet Wolseley's life and achievements that W.S. Gilbert used to model his modern Major General on from the Pirates of Penzance. To round off this first lecture in the South Africa series, I would like to just mention that one of the early Voortrekkers actually crossed the Drakensberg mountain pretty much in the place where we will cross it on the second day of our ride. There were 2 Voortrekkers that were in fact a vanguard of the main group. These were Louis Trekkard and Hans von Rensburg. They went much further north than where we will be going. Then they parted company. Van Rensburg was hell-bent on getting to Lourenço Marques, and so parted company with Trekkard and went further north across the Limpopo River, where he was never seen again. You can see by revisiting the chart we looked at earlier the route that Trekkard and Van Ringen took. Van Rensburg is the blue line which crosses the Limpopo River and comes to a dead end. Trekkard's is the red line which doubles back and where it's circled crosses the Drakensberg quite near where we will. Trekkard hung around for some time waiting for the main group of Voortrekkers to come, but then got itchy feet and headed back south and traversed the area where we will go through Popelwane, crossed the Drakensberg just south of where we will cross it, and probably came out pretty much where we will get to the lowland. Thereupon he tracked the Olifants River through some of the safari country that we will traverse. We will cross the Olifants River, so we're hand in hand with him for a while there. He eventually did make it to Lourenço Marques, but unfortunately most of his group, including himself and his wife, died of malaria. So a final thought for this first lecture: be wary of what's ahead of us on the low country, and be sure to increase your intake of quinine, and of course the most potent source of that is tonic water. Thank you for listening. Just excuse me, I have a visitor. Gotta do it.
Sometimes alone